Winter's breath had turned lethal by December 1944, and somewhere in the frozen hell of Belgium's Ardennes Forest, destiny was preparing to test one man's promise against impossible odds. This wasn't just another battle in the brutal machinery of World War II. This was the moment when a single phone call, 4 audacious words, and 72 hours of organized fury would determine whether 20,000 American soldiers lived or died in the snow. The German Wehrmacht had unleashed their final devastating gamble, and only one general in the entire Allied command possessed the sheer audacity to promise the impossible. His name was George Smith Patton, and history was about to witness why they called him Old Blood and Guts. Before dawn broke on December 16, 1944, the Ardennes Forest held its breath. American soldiers manning the quietest sector of the Western Front had no idea they were standing at ground zero of Hitler's last desperate masterstroke. At precisely 5:30 in the morning, the winter darkness erupted with the thunder of 2,000 German artillery pieces firing simultaneously. The earth itself seemed to scream as shells tore through frozen air and exploded among American positions that had grown comfortably complacent after months of steady victory. In that single apocalyptic moment, 250,000 German soldiers surged forward through the weak point in Allied defenses, and the bloodiest winter battle in American military history exploded into existence. Operation Watch on Rhine represented Hitler's final roll of the dice in a war Germany was steadily losing. The Führer had stripped every available division from quiet fronts, gambling everything on one massive surprise offensive designed to split the Allied armies, capture the vital Belgian port of Antwerp, and force the Americans and British to negotiate peace terms that would leave Nazi Germany intact. 29 divisions, 1,000 tanks, elite SS panzer units hardened by years of brutal combat on the Eastern Front. This wasn't a desperate last stand by broken troops. This was Germany's strategic reserve, every veteran soldier and experienced tank crew they could scrape together, launched in a coordinated assault that caught the overconfident Americans completely off guard. The German breakthrough exceeded even Hitler's wildest expectations during those first catastrophic 48 hours. American units, and many consisting of green replacements seeing their first combat, found themselves facing battle-hardened veterans who had survived the meat grinder of the Russian front. The Germans didn't just attack, they obliterated defensive positions with methodical efficiency. Panzer divisions smashed through American lines with terrifying speed, creating a bulge that pushed 40 miles into Allied territory within 2 days, then 50 miles, then 60 miles of penetration into what Allied commanders had considered secure rear areas. Supply depots were overrun, field hospitals captured, entire battalions surrounded and forced to surrender after running out of ammunition. The roads clogged with desperate Belgian civilians fleeing westward, their carts and belongings mixing with retreating American units in a chaos that German commanders exploited with ruthless precision. At the strategic heart of this expanding German offensive sat the ancient Belgian town of Bastogne, a medieval crossroads that suddenly became the most critical piece of real estate in Western Europe. 7 roads radiated from Bastogne like spokes on a wheel, and controlling those roads meant controlling the entire region's transportation network. Without Bastogne, German armor had to navigate narrow, winding forest paths that slowed their advance to a crawl and made them vulnerable to counterattack. With Bastogne in German hands, panzer divisions could move freely in any direction, exploiting their breakthrough to drive all the way to Antwerp and split the Allied armies permanently. And the town had to be held at any cost, and fate had placed America's elite paratroopers directly in harm's way. The 101st Airborne Division represented the absolute pinnacle of American military capability. These weren't ordinary infantry soldiers. These were the men who had parachuted into Normandy on D-Day while machine gun fire tore through their ranks. The paratroopers who had fought through the hell of Operation Market Garden in Holland. Warriors who had earned their reputation as the toughest fighters in the United States Army through blood and sacrifice across multiple campaigns. Now, 10,000 of them found themselves completely encircled in Bastogne, cut off from all supply lines, facing 5 full-strength German divisions that were systematically tightening the noose. Alongside the paratroopers stood elements of the 10th Armored Division, tank crews whose vehicles were running out of fuel, infantry without adequate ammunition, medics performing surgery with whatever instruments they could sterilize in freezing cellars of bombed-out buildings. The weather transformed a desperate situation into a nightmare scenario beyond anything military planners had imagined. A massive winter storm system had settled over the Ardennes like a suffocating blanket, bringing temperatures that plunged below 0 Fahrenheit and blizzards that reduced visibility to mere yards. Allied aircraft, the technological advantage that had dominated European skies since D-Day, sat grounded on airfields across France and England. No air support could reach the surrounded garrison. No supply planes could drop ammunition or medical supplies. No reconnaissance aircraft could photograph German positions or track their movements. The defenders of Bastogne were blind, isolated, and running out of time. German infantry advanced through the white curtain of snow, invisible until they opened fire at point-blank range. American soldiers froze to death in their foxholes, their bodies discovered hours later in positions they'd defended to their last breath. At Supreme Headquarters, Allied Expeditionary Force in Versailles, the mood resembled a funeral wake. General Dwight David Eisenhower, Supreme Commander of all Allied forces in Europe, stood before his wall-mounted situation map and watched red German arrows surround the blue symbol marking American forces at Bastogne. 3 sides were already encircled. Soon it would be 4, complete entrapment with no escape route. His Chief of Staff, Lieutenant General Walter Bedell Smith, delivered the brutal assessment with quiet professionalism that couldn't hide the desperation underneath. The surrounded paratroopers had maybe 72 hours of ammunition remaining if they rationed every bullet with extreme discipline. Medical supplies were virtually exhausted. Wounded soldiers were having limbs amputated without anesthesia because the morphine had run out days ago. Food supplies were down to starvation rations. Men were drinking melted snow contaminated with debris and blood because there was no alternative. Eisenhower understood the strategic implications better than anyone in the Allied command structure. Bastogne controlled those 7 critical road junctions, and losing them to the Germans would transform a dangerous offensive into an existential crisis. German panzers could pour through those roads and drive straight to Antwerp, cutting off the supply lines that fed the entire Allied advance. The beaches of Normandy, the liberation of Paris, the steady eastward push toward Germany's border, everything won through 6 months of brutal combat could be lost if Bastogne fell. The German offensive might actually succeed in splitting American and British forces, creating the conditions for a negotiated peace that would leave Hitler's regime intact. The war that seemed nearly won in November 1944 suddenly looked like it might drag on for years. British Field Marshal Bernard Law Montgomery, commanding the 21st Army Group, advocated for caution and consolidation. His proposal was methodical and professionally sound from a conventional military perspective. Pull back to more defensible positions along the Meuse River. Reorganize scattered units. Bring up fresh reserves. Coordinate a proper counter-offensive that would require weeks or perhaps months of careful preparation. Montgomery's approach minimized risk and maximized the chances of eventual success through overwhelming force properly applied. It was sensible, professional, and entirely unacceptable to the Americans trapped in Bastogne, who would be dead or captured long before any such methodical offensive could be launched. Eisenhower made a decision that revealed everything about his leadership under pressure. He called an emergency meeting at Verdun, France, ordering every senior American commander to attend immediately. And the date was December 19th, 1944, 3 days after the German offensive began. The subject was immediate counterattack, not eventual counterattack or properly planned counterattack, but immediate action to relieve Bastogne before those 10,000 paratroopers ran out of bullets and were forced to choose between surrender and death. The question Eisenhower needed answered was simple and terrifying. Which general could do the impossible? Which commander possessed the audacity, the skill, and frankly the crazy aggressive spirit necessary to turn an entire army 90 degrees, march through winter hell, smash through prepared German defenses, and reach Bastogne within days instead of weeks? Eisenhower already knew the answer before the meeting began. Well, there was only one general in the entire Allied command structure bold enough and aggressive enough to even attempt what he was about to request. General George Smith Patton commanded the United States Third Army, and his reputation for audacious offensive warfare was legendary. Old blood and guts had earned his nickname through years of leading from the front, personally directing tank charges while other generals commanded from safe rear headquarters. He wore pearl-handled pistols and delivered profane speeches that could make hardened combat veterans weep with determination. He believed war was humanity's highest calling and viewed every battle as an opportunity to prove American military superiority through aggressive action. Patton was controversial, profane, arrogant, and absolutely brilliant at mobile warfare. If anyone could perform a miracle at Bastogne, it was George Smith Patton. The conference room in the French barracks at Verdun was freezing cold because the heating system had broken and nobody had time to fix it. Outside, temperatures had dropped to 15 degrees Fahrenheit. Inside, 12 generals gathered around a map table covered with acetate overlays showing unit positions. Their breath was visible in the frigid air. Their heavy winter coats were buttoned tight against the cold. These men commanded hundreds of thousands of soldiers, thousands of tanks and artillery pieces, the greatest military force America had ever assembled in Europe. And they were facing potential disaster because the German offensive had thrown every carefully laid plan into complete chaos. Eisenhower opened the meeting at 11 in the morning with characteristic directness. His Kansas accent was clipped and professional, but everyone present could hear the strain underneath each word. Gentlemen, the present situation is to be regarded as one of opportunity for us and not of disaster. There will be only cheerful faces at this conference table. It was a command, not a suggestion. Eisenhower understood the psychology of military leadership. If the generals started thinking defensively, started believing in potential defeat, that attitude would filter down through their commands and become a self-fulfilling prophecy. Confidence had to be maintained even when the situation looked desperate. George Smith Patton grinned broadly, a genuine smile that transformed his stern, weathered face. And while other commanders looked exhausted and worried, old blood and guts seemed energized, excited, almost joyful. This was his kind of fight, aggressive, bold, desperate. The kind of battle where conventional cautious thinking meant death and audacious action meant victory. The kind of situation where George Smith Patton's aggressive instincts would be unleashed rather than restrained by more cautious superiors. His eyes gleamed with an emotion that looked disturbingly like anticipation. Eisenhower continued, pointing at the situation map with a wooden pointer. I want a counterattack, not next month, not next week, not tomorrow. Now, immediately. We need to relieve Bastogne before those paratroopers run out of ammunition and before the Germans can consolidate their gains and exploit their breakthrough. But he turned from the map and looked directly at one man. George, what can Third Army do? Every eye in the conference room shifted to General George Smith Patton. His Third Army was positioned 90 miles south of Bastogne, heavily engaged in their own successful offensive, pushing toward the German border and destroying enemy units with systematic efficiency. They were winning, advancing, preparing to cross into Germany itself and carry the war directly to the Nazi homeland. To disengage from that offensive, turn 90 degrees north, reorganize the entire command structure, coordinate with unfamiliar units, develop completely new supply lines through unknown territory, and attack through the worst winter weather in 50 years while facing German forces that knew they were coming. Military theory taught at every war college said such a maneuver required 2 weeks minimum, 3 weeks to do it properly, 4 weeks to do it safely with acceptable risk levels. George Smith Patton studied the situation map for exactly 10 seconds. His experienced eyes traced the roads from his current positions to Bastogne, calculated distances, assessed terrain, considered the German forces blocking the way. Then he looked up and spoke 4 words that would echo through military history for generations. "I stake my career." The room went absolutely silent. You could have heard a pin drop on the concrete floor. Every general stopped breathing for a moment. Then Old Blood and Guts continued with absolute confidence. On December 22nd, the 4th Armored Division attacks north toward the Bastogne. I stake my career on it. One general, was a careful, methodical officer who had never liked Patton's aggressive style, laughed nervously. "George, be serious. That's 72 hours from now. You're heavily engaged on your current front with 3 German divisions. You'd need to disengage 6 divisions from active combat, pivot them 90 degrees north, reorganize your entire command structure, coordinate 3 different attack routes through territory you've never fought in, all in the worst weather conditions of the war. You'd be attacking through snow and forests against German troops who know you're coming and will fight like demons to stop you." He paused, shaking his head. "George, it's impossible. Literally impossible by any professional military standard." George Smith Patton met his eyes with an expression of absolute unshakable confidence. "I've already done the planning. 3 divisions initially attacking on 3 parallel routes to split German defenses. The 4th Armored Division drives up the center directly toward Bastogne. The 26th Infantry Division attacks on the left flank. The 81st Infantry Division secures the right flank. We'll reach Bastogne in 72 hours, break the siege, and then destroy every German unit in the salient. 3rd Army doesn't just relieve surrounded garrisons, we annihilate enemies." Another commander, more sympathetic but equally skeptical, shook his head slowly. "George, I admire your confidence. Truly I do. But the logistics alone are staggering. Moving that many men, that many vehicles, coordinating ammunition supplies, fuel, food, medical support across 90 miles of unfamiliar terrain. How can you possibly organize all that in 3 days when proper planning requires weeks?" Old Blood and Guts smiled, but it wasn't a friendly smile. It was a predator's smile. "Because I've already done it. When I saw this German offensive developing 3 days ago, I knew exactly what would be needed. I had my staff prepare 3 contingency plans for precisely this scenario. My operations orders are already drafted. My division commanders already have their preliminary instructions. My supply officers are already repositioning fuel and ammunition stockpiles. Give me the order right now, this minute, and 3rd Army moves tonight. Not tomorrow night. Tonight. We disengage, reorganize, and attack within 72 hours exactly as I promise." The conference room erupted into multiple conversations. Now, some generals were excited by Patton's audacity. Others worried that his aggressive confidence would lead to disaster. Several pointed out the enormous risks involved in such a rapid maneuver. Montgomery's concerns about rushing forward without proper preparation echoed through discussions. But Eisenhower held up his hand for silence, and when the Supreme Commander spoke, his voice carried the weight of ultimate authority. "George, I need you to understand something critical. This isn't just about saving 10,000 paratroopers, though God knows that's important enough. If you fail, if Bastogne falls, the Germans gain those critical road junctions. Their offensive continues. They might actually reach the Meuse River. They might split our armies permanently. This could become another Dunkirk, except this time there's no evacuation possible. This time, if we lose everything we've gained since D-Day." He paused, making sure every syllable registered. "If you fail, those paratroopers die. All of them. 10,000 of our best soldiers frozen or dead in the snow. And if Bastogne falls, the entire Allied position in Europe could collapse." George Smith Patton stood up from the map table. At 5 feet 11 inches, he wasn't particularly tall, but his presence dominated the room completely. His jaw was set in an expression of absolute determination. His eyes were fierce with controlled aggression. When he spoke, every syllable carried unshakable conviction. Ike, I don't plan to fail. Failure isn't in my vocabulary. I didn't come to Europe to lose battles. But I came to destroy the German army and end this war through aggressive offensive action. This is what Third Army was built for. This is what I've trained my men to do. This is what I was born for. He tapped the map where Bastogne was marked with a blue circle surrounded by red German positions. We'll smash through whatever the Germans put in front of us. We'll drive north like a spear through their flank. We'll reach Bastogne in 72 hours, and then we'll destroy every German division that was stupid enough to attack the United States Army. General Omar Nelson Bradley, Patton's immediate superior and commander of 12th Army Group, spoke carefully. Bradley and Patton had a complicated relationship, respect mixed with frequent disagreement about tactics and style. George, even if you disengage successfully from your current offensive, or even if you reorganize and move north without the Germans catching you during the vulnerable transition period, you'll still be attacking through the Ardennes in winter. Limited roads through heavy forests, deep snow, ice, river crossings. And the Germans will be fighting for their lives because they understand that if you reach Bastogne, their entire offensive fails. They'll throw everything at you. Are you absolutely certain about this timeline? Old Blood and Guts walked around the table until he stood directly in front of Bradley. Brad, I fought Germans in North Africa. I fought them in Sicily. I fought them across France from Normandy to the German border. I know how they think. I know how they fight. And I know they cannot stop me. Not in 72 hours. Not in 72 days. Give me the order, and I'll show you what happens when you finally unleash the United States Third Army without restrictions. He turned to face the entire room. Gentlemen, I'll be in Bastogne for Christmas dinner. My only question is whether the 101st will have anything left to serve besides dead Germans. Eisenhower made his decision. Do it. Execute immediately. You have full authority to disengage from your current operations and attack north. You'll coordinate with First Army on your left flank. You'll have priority for any air support if the weather clears. You'll have whatever resources I can give you. Just reach Bastogne, George. Reach those paratroopers before they're forced to surrender or die. George Smith Patton interrupted. Ike, I don't need extensive coordination with British forces. They move too methodically for what I'm planning. I'll coordinate with First Army because the situation requires it, but my axis of attack will be independent. Third Army fights the way Third Army fights. Fast, aggressive, and without stopping until we achieve total victory. Eisenhower nodded. He had expected nothing less from Old Blood and Guts. Just reach Bastogne, George. Reach those paratroopers before it's too late. Patton smiled, and this time it was different. Not the Predator's smile, but something that might have been genuine emotion breaking through his carefully cultivated aggressive persona. Ike, those paratroopers have held against 5 German divisions for 3 days already. They're the toughest sons of bitches in our entire army. They don't need saving. They need ammunition and support so they can keep killing Germans. Well, that's what I'm bringing them. Bullets, tanks, and Old Blood and Guts. The Germans are about to discover what happens when you corner American paratroopers and then face George Smith Patton coming to their relief. He walked toward the door, then paused and looked back. And Ike, God help the Germans, because I don't plan on showing any mercy whatsoever. The door closed. General George Smith Patton was gone, already mentally commanding his Third Army, already seeing the battle unfold in his mind, already planning the minute details of an operation that would either save an army or destroy his legendary career forever. But could he really pull off this impossible promise? Could any human being move 250,000 men 90 degrees in 72 hours? The next 3 days would answer those questions with bullets, blood, frozen bodies in the snow. December 19th, 1944, 4:45 in the afternoon. General George Smith Patton returned to his Third Army headquarters in Luxembourg and issued one word to his Chief of Staff: execute. What happened next remains one of the most remarkable military maneuvers in the entire history of modern warfare, an operation that military analysts still study decades later with a mixture of awe and professional disbelief. Within 6 hours, 6 divisions of the United States Third Army, more than 130,000 men, began simultaneously disengaging from active combat operations. Not retreating, which would have been dangerous enough, but disengaging while maintaining pressure on the enemy, which required an entirely different level of coordination and tactical skill. Each division had to extract itself from active fighting without giving German forces an opportunity to counterattack or pursue. Had to reorganize their internal structure from offensive operations to movement. Had to receive new orders, new maps, new objectives. Had to change direction 90 degrees and begin moving north through completely unfamiliar territory. All simultaneously, all in darkness, all in freezing weather with snow reducing visibility to a few yards. The 4th Armored Division, commanded by Major General Hugh Joseph Gaffey, led the way. This was Patton's spearhead, his favorite division, the unit he trusted to break through any defensive line ever constructed. 10,000 men, 300 Sherman tanks, 200 half-tracks, artillery batteries, engineer companies, support units. When they began moving at midnight on December the 20th, 1944, tank engines roared to life in the freezing darkness. Crews who had been sleeping in their vehicles for warmth scrambled to action stations. Tank commanders received coordinates to positions 90 miles north, coordinates that led directly into German-held territory, coordinates that meant heavy combat was coming very soon. Behind them came the 26th Infantry Division, the Yankee Division recruited from New England states. 14,000 infantry soldiers who had been fighting continuously for weeks and were physically and mentally exhausted. Exhausted men who had earned their rest. Instead, they got new orders. March north immediately, attack through winter conditions. Save the surrounded paratroopers. Behind them came the 81st Infantry Division, of the Blue Ridge Division from Pennsylvania, Virginia, and West Virginia. Mountain men who understood how to fight in rough terrain, who knew cold weather and hard conditions from their upbringing. They would attack on the right flank, screening Third Army's advance from German counterattack. 133,000 men, 11,000 vehicles, 20,000 tons of supplies, all moving north simultaneously through darkness and snow. The largest rapid military pivot in modern warfare history. But moving the men was only part of the monumental challenge facing George Smith Patton. He had to coordinate fuel supplies for thousands of vehicles, each consuming gasoline at frightening rates. Had to organize ammunition supplies, literally millions of rounds for rifles, machine guns, mortars, artillery. Had to arrange for food, medical supplies, spare parts for vehicles, radio batteries, winter clothing, everything an army needs to function in combat conditions. And he had to accomplish all of this while German forces were actively trying to stop him. Old Blood and Guts drove the operation personally, while other generals commanded from warm headquarters, reviewing written reports and making decisions based on radio communications. George Smith Patton was on the roads. In his personal jeep, driven by his longtime aide, Patton appeared at critical crossroads directing traffic personally. At division command posts demanding faster movement, at river crossings where engineers struggled to build bridges capable of handling 60-ton Sherman tanks. His pearl-handled pistols gleamed at his hips. His face weathered and stern, and was set in an expression of absolute unwavering determination. Soldiers who saw him during that desperate night never forgot the sight. Old Blood and Guts himself, pushing his army north, refusing to accept any excuse for delay. "Drive forward," he shouted at a tank column that had stopped because of mechanical problems. "I don't care if you have to push these tanks with your bare hands. We move north. We reach Bastogne. No excuses, no delays, no stopping." A young lieutenant struggling to coordinate his company's movement in the darkness and snow heard a voice behind him. "Lieutenant, what's the problem?" He turned and found himself facing General George Smith Patton himself, the legendary Old Blood and Guts standing there in the freezing darkness. The lieutenant stammered nervously. "Sir, we're waiting for orders on which road to take. There's confusion about the route, and—" "Take the left fork," Patton interrupted immediately. "It's 3 miles longer, but the road surface is better. You'll make better time. Now move before I have you leading this company from a jeep instead of commanding it properly." The lieutenant moved instantly. Throughout that long night and into December 20th, Patton was everywhere his army needed him, solving problems as they arose, making instant decisions, pushing his commanders to move faster, drive harder, accept no delays whatsoever. The 20th of December brought even worse weather conditions. Temperatures dropped below 0 Fahrenheit. Snow fell continuously, heavy wet snow that made every road treacherous. Vehicles skidded off into ditches and had to be recovered by tank retriever units. Tank treads froze solid and had to be broken loose with hammers. Men developed frostbite within hours of exposure, their fingers freezing to metal gun barrels, their faces developing white patches that meant permanent tissue damage. And still Old Blood and Guts pushed them forward relentlessly. "Keep moving," he radioed to his division commanders. "The men in Bastogne are colder than you are. They're running out of ammunition while you drive north. They're performing amputations without anesthesia while you complain about frozen engines. Move forward. I don't want to hear about problems. I want to hear about solutions and progress." By December 21st, German intelligence had realized what was happening. Their aerial reconnaissance, flying between storm clouds when visibility allowed, photographed the massive American movement, and their radio intercept units decoded enough communications to understand the scale. An entire United States Army, 6 full divisions, was turning 90 degrees north, heading directly toward the salient, heading toward Bastogne with aggressive intent. A captured German officer, interrogated after the battle when the outcome was no longer in doubt, later admitted something revealing. "When we learned Patton had turned his entire army north in 72 hours, when we understood what he had accomplished, we knew the battle was already effectively lost. This maneuver wasn't possible by any military standard we understood. We knew no other general could have done this. Rommel, perhaps in his prime, but Rommel was dead. Montgomery would have needed a month. Bradley would have needed 2 weeks. Only Patton could do this. Only Old Blood and Guts would even attempt something this audacious." The German High Command frantically repositioned forces to block Third Army's advance. They understood the strategic stakes perfectly. If George Smith Patton reached Bastogne, if he broke the siege, the entire German offensive would collapse immediately. The bulge into Allied lines would become a trap with German forces caught between Patton's Third Army attacking from the south and other Allied forces pressing from the north and west. They threw everything available into stopping him. SS divisions, elite troops, veteran units pulled from defensive positions elsewhere. The fighting that began on December the 21st, 1944, was some of the most vicious combat of the entire Western European campaign. Yet the 26th Infantry Division hit the German defensive line at the town of Ardennes in southern Belgium. SS troops had fortified every building over several days. Machine gun nests covered every approach route. Artillery batteries were zeroed in on every road. Anti-tank guns were positioned to destroy any Sherman tank that showed itself. The American infantry attacked through waist-deep snow. Young men from Massachusetts and Connecticut and Vermont, charging through open fields toward enemy positions, taking horrific casualties with every yard gained. Machine gun fire cut through their ranks like a scythe. Artillery shells exploded in their midst, sending shrapnel through unprotected bodies. Mortar rounds fell from the sky like deadly rain. They advanced anyway because Old Blood and Guts had given them orders, and you didn't fail George Smith Patton. The 81st Infantry Division smashed into German positions at the town of Mersch in Luxembourg. A full regiment of German paratroopers, elite troops, veterans of Crete and the brutal Eastern Front, defended every house, every street corner, every crossroads with fanatical determination. They knew Patton was coming. They knew what it meant strategically. They fought with the desperate courage of men who understood they were probably delaying the inevitable, but might buy enough time for their comrades elsewhere. They fought to the last man, and the 81st Division destroyed them systematically, house by house, room by room, and kept moving north without pause. The 4th Armored Division, spearheading the entire advance, crashed into the German 5th Parachute Division south of Bastogne. Tank battles fought in blizzard conditions with visibility of 50 yards at best. Sherman tanks firing almost blind into the snow, hitting German Panthers and Tigers by sound alone, by the distinctive roar of their engines, by muzzle flashes barely visible through the white curtain. Tank commanders fought buttoned up inside their steel coffins, unable to see, relying entirely on their drivers and gunners to find targets before those targets killed them. German anti-tank guns appeared from nowhere out of the snow, fired once, destroyed a Sherman in a fireball, then disappeared back into the white curtain before American tanks could return fire. American tank destroyers hunted them like predators, searching for the telltale muzzle flash that gave away enemy positions. Men died screaming in burning tanks. Crews bailed out of disabled vehicles only to freeze to death within minutes before they could reach aid stations. Wounded soldiers with missing limbs bled out in the snow because medics couldn't reach them fast enough through the battlefield chaos. And still, the 4th Armored Division drove forward relentlessly. George Smith Patton received hourly updates at his headquarters, tracking his division's progress on acetate overlays covering his situation map. Red pencil marks showing German positions. Blue arrows showing American advances measured in yards and miles, in casualties and destroyed vehicles, in time running out for the men trapped in Bastogne. Each time the advance slowed, each time a division reported heavy resistance or requested permission to pause and reorganize, Patton was on the radio immediately. His voice was harsh, demanding, allowing absolutely no excuse. Keep attacking. Don't stop. Don't slow down. The paratroopers in Bastogne are counting every minute. Every hour we delay, more of them die. Every hour we stop, more Germans reinforce the positions in front of us. Move forward. Attack at night if you have to. Attack blind if necessary. But attack continuously until you break through. His division commanders, hardened veterans who had fought across North Africa, Sicily, and France, obeyed without question. Because they had learned that old blood and guts was right. Because they had learned that Patton's aggressive instincts won battles. Because they trusted him to lead them to victory, no matter how impossible the odds appeared. Inside Bastogne, completely unaware that George Smith Patton was racing toward them with 3 divisions, the situation grew more desperate by the hour. The 101st Airborne Division, commanded by Brigadier General Anthony Clement McAuliffe, fought off continuous German attacks from all directions. They had ammunition for maybe one more day of heavy fighting, 2 days maximum if they rationed every bullet carefully, and accepted that some positions might have to fight hand-to-hand when they ran completely out. Medical supplies were totally exhausted. Doctors performed surgery with whatever instruments they could sterilize. Morphine was gone, used up days ago. The wounded lay in freezing cellars of damaged buildings, hoping desperately that help would arrive before gangrene set in, before they froze to death, before they simply gave up and died. Food was nearly gone. Soldiers were on quarter rations, barely enough calories to survive in the brutal cold. Water came from melted snow contaminated with debris and blood, but drinkable if you were desperate enough. And everyone was that desperate. The cold was killing men as surely as German bullets. Frostbite claimed hundreds of casualties. Feet froze solid inside boots. Fingers became black and useless. Wounded soldiers unable to move simply froze to death, lying where they had fallen. Their bodies discovered hours later, frozen solid. On December 22nd, 1944, the Germans sent a formal surrender demand under a flag of truce. 4 German officers approached American lines carrying a typed message addressed to the commander of the encircled American forces. The message was clear and professionally phrased. You are surrounded. You are outnumbered 5-1. You have no hope of relief. Your situation is hopeless. Surrender now with honor, and we will guarantee the lives of your men according to the Geneva Convention. Refuse, and we will destroy you completely without mercy. The message was delivered to General Anthony Clement McAuliffe. He read it once, looked at his staff officers with an expression they couldn't quite interpret, and spoke one word that would become immortal: nuts. His staff officers stared in confusion. Sir, what should we write as a formal reply to the German commander? McAuliffe looked genuinely confused. What's wrong with nuts? That's exactly what I said, isn't it? Write that down and send it back. They typed up his one-word reply to the German commander. Nuts. Signed by the American commander. The German officers, when they received this response through the lines, were completely baffled. And their English wasn't sophisticated enough to understand the American colloquialism. An American officer explained helpfully with barely concealed satisfaction. It means go to hell, and if you attack again, we'll kill every single one of you. The Germans got the message clearly. The battle continued with renewed ferocity. That same day, December the 22nd, 1944, exactly as General George Smith Patton had promised 72 hours earlier at the Verdun Conference, the United States Third Army launched its main assault toward Bastogne. 3 divisions attacking on 3 separate axes, simultaneous pressure against every German defensive position between Third Army and the surrounded paratroopers. This is why they called him Old Blood and Guts. This is why soldiers followed him into hell itself. While other generals calculated risks and requested more time, George Smith Patton attacked. Always forward, always aggressive, no delay, no excuse, no stopping until complete victory was achieved. The 4th Armored Division, commanded by Major General Hugh Joseph Gaffey, but with Patton constantly monitoring their progress and demanding faster advance, drove straight up the center. Their objective was Bastogne, 11 miles away. 11 miles through German-held territory. 11 miles that might as well have been 1,000, given the defensive positions in their path. Combat Command B of the 4th Armored Division, led by Lieutenant Colonel Crichton Williams Abrams, spearheaded the attack. Abrams was already a legend in his own right, a tank commander who led from the front, whose column of Sherman tanks had broken through more German defensive lines than any other unit in Third Army. If anyone could reach Bastogne, it was Crichton Abrams and his experienced tank crews. They attacked through the village of Chaumont, defended by German infantry supported by dug-in anti-tank guns. The fighting was brutal and close range, buildings exploding as tank shells punched through stone walls. American infantry followed the tanks, clearing each house room by room, killing or capturing German soldiers who fought from cellars and attics with desperate determination. They attacked through Remy-Champagne, where German tanks were dug and hull down, nearly invisible in the snow until they fired. American tank destroyers dueled with German Panthers at 200 yards. Both sides firing repeatedly until one side exploded or withdrew. American losses were heavy. They advanced anyway, leaving burning vehicles and dead soldiers behind. On December 23, 1944, the weather finally cleared. The massive storm system that had grounded Allied aircraft for a full week moved east. For the first time since the German offensive began, Allied air power could be brought to bear with devastating effect. The sky filled with aircraft, hundreds of them, C-47 cargo planes flying directly over Bastogne at low altitude, dropping supplies by parachute, ammunition, medical supplies, food, blankets, everything the surrounded garrison desperately needed. The paratroopers below cheered hoarsely as supply canisters floated down from the clear blue sky, as American planes proved they weren't forgotten, weren't abandoned, but were still part of a vast military machine working to save them. Fighter bombers attacked German positions throughout the salient with systematic violence. P-47 Thunderbolts diving from the sky, rockets and bombs obliterating German tanks. artillery positions, supply columns. The German advance, already stalling under Third Army's pressure, ground to a complete halt. German commanders found themselves fighting defensively instead of exploiting their breakthrough, and George Smith Patton's Third Army continued its relentless drive north, killing Germans, destroying equipment, advancing through blood and snow toward Bastogne. December 24th, Christmas Eve. The 4th Armored Division was 5 miles from Bastogne. 5 miles and a lifetime away. German resistance had stiffened to the point of absolute desperation, and they knew with complete certainty that if Bastogne was relieved, the entire offensive was doomed. Not just this battle, but Germany's ability to continue the war effectively. They fought with everything they had left. Every available soldier, every remaining tank, every anti-tank gun, machine gun, rifle. They mined the roads, demolished bridges, destroyed every piece of cover that might shelter American troops advancing toward Bastogne. The fighting on Christmas Eve was the worst yet. Combat Command B attacked the village of Eisenhower, 4 miles from Bastogne. The Germans had turned it into a fortress over the previous days. Every building fortified, every field covered by pre-registered artillery, a carefully prepared killing ground designed to stop tank advances cold. A Lieutenant Colonel Crichton Abrams studied the situation and made a decision that would define his military career. He ordered his lead company of Sherman tanks to attack at absolute full speed, not stopping to fight defensively, just driving through enemy fire at maximum velocity toward Bastogne. "Go fast," he radioed to his tank commanders. "Don't stop for anything. Don't engage unless you absolutely must. Break through to those paratroopers at any cost." The lead tank, commanded by Lieutenant Charles Bogus, roared forward at maximum speed. Machine guns firing continuously, main gun firing at any target that presented itself, crushing obstacles, racing past German positions that couldn't train their guns fast enough to hit a speeding tank. Behind Lieutenant Bogus came more Shermans in column. A spearhead of armor and mechanized infantry, fighting through Eisenhower in brutal house-to-house combat, leaving the village in flames behind them, racing desperately toward Bastogne while men died around them. December 26, 1944, 4:45 in the afternoon. Lieutenant Colonel Crichton Williams Abrams stood in the turret of his Sherman tank. His face was blackened with powder burns and frostbite. His eyes were bloodshot from 3 straight days without real sleep, coordinating his column's advance, leading from the front, exactly as old blood and guts had taught him through personal example. Ahead, through the snow that was falling again, through the smoke of burning vehicles, through the haze of battle, he could see something. Buildings, the outskirts of Bastogne, and in front of those buildings, dug into defensive positions. American troops. Helmets, weapons, the distinctive profile of United States paratroopers. Abrams felt tears freeze on his face instantly in the bitter cold. They had done it. Against every conceivable odd, against time itself, against the German army, against winter and snow and death, they had done it. The radio crackled in his headphones. "This is Red Able. We have visual contact with friendly forces. Repeat. Visual contact with Bastogne defenders. The siege is broken." At 4:50 in the afternoon on December the 26th, 1944, lead elements of the 4th Armored Division made physical contact with the 101st Airborne Division. A Sherman tank pulled up to a foxhole where a filthy, exhausted paratrooper stood with a rifle, his uniform torn and blood-stained. The tank commander, his voice shaking with emotion, said simply, "We're from 3rd Army. We're here to get you out." The paratrooper looked up at him, smiled through cracked and bleeding lips, and delivered a line that would echo through history. "Get us out? Hell, we've been waiting for you so we'd have someone to share all these dead Germans with." The siege of Bastogne was broken. 10,000 surrounded paratroopers suddenly had ammunition, medical supplies, reinforcements, food, and most importantly, hope. 15 minutes after Creighton Abrams tanks made contact with the 101st Airborne Division, the telephone rang at 3rd Army headquarters in Luxembourg. General George Smith Patton was studying his situation map, already planning the next phase of operations. Relief of Bastogne wasn't the end of anything. It was just the beginning. Now he needed to destroy the German forces in the salient completely, or crush the offensive totally. Turn Hitler's attack into a disaster that would cripple Germany's ability to continue the war. His chief of staff answered the phone, listened for a moment, then handed it to Patton with an expression of profound emotion. "Sir, it's General Eisenhower." Old blood and guts took the receiver. "Patton here." The voice on the other end was General Dwight David Eisenhower, Supreme Commander of Allied Expeditionary Forces, the man who commanded millions of soldiers, who coordinated strategy with Churchill and Roosevelt, who bore ultimate responsibility for victory or defeat in Western Europe. "George," Eisenhower said, his voice thick with emotion that he wasn't trying to hide. "I just received confirmation from 1st Army. Your 4th Armored Division reached Bastogne at 1650 hours. 72 hours. Exactly as you promised. Exactly as you staked your career on." George Smith Patton allowed himself a brief moment of satisfaction. Just a moment before his mind moved to the next objective. "Ike, I told you 3rd Army would do it. I told you those paratroopers wouldn't be abandoned, but we're not finished, not by any means. Now we destroy the German units that created this bulge. Now we show them conclusively what happens when they challenge the United States of America." There was a long pause on the line. Eisenhower was composing himself, struggling with overwhelming emotion. Personnel at SHAEF headquarters later reported that tears were streaming down the Supreme Commander's face as he made this call. Tears of relief. Tears for the lives saved. Tears for what George Smith Patton had accomplished against impossible odds. When Eisenhower spoke again, his voice shook slightly. "George, I need to say something. 4 days ago when we met at Verdun, every military expert in that room told me you couldn't do this. They said it was literally impossible, potentially suicidal. They wanted to wait, to plan for weeks, to prepare a methodical offensive with acceptable risk levels. You looked at that situation map, looked directly at me, and said 4 words that I will never forget for the rest of my life." Patton waited silently. He knew what was coming. "I stake my career," Eisenhower quoted. 4 words. 4 words that meant you were willing to risk everything. Your reputation, your command, your entire legacy on a promise that no other general in the Allied command would make. 4 words that saved 10,000 lives. 4 words that might have saved this entire war. His voice broke slightly with emotion. "George Smith Patton, you magnificent aggressive bastard. Thank you. Thank you for being audacious when caution would have been safer. Thank you for trusting your combat instincts when experts said you were wrong. Thank you for moving heaven and earth to save those paratroopers. Thank you for being exactly who you are, old blood and guts, the finest combat commander this army has ever produced in its history. For once in his entire life, George Smith Patton, the man who cultivated an image of invincible confidence, who drove his soldiers with profane fury, who never showed weakness or doubt publicly, paused before responding. When he spoke, his voice was quiet, almost gentle. "Ike, tell those paratroopers they fought like lions. Tell them old blood and guts is profoundly proud to serve alongside them. Tell them they held when holding was impossible by any rational standard. They fought when surrender would have been completely understandable. They proved that American soldiers are the toughest warriors on earth." He paused, and when he continued, his voice hardened again. "And tell them we're just getting started. Tell them 3rd Army isn't stopping until we've killed every German soldier who had the stupidity to attack the United States." That night, late on December the 26th, 1944, General George Smith Patton personally visited the front lines at Bastogne. He didn't have to. Commanding generals aren't supposed to risk themselves at the forward edge of battle. But Old Blood and Guts never commanded from behind a desk when he could command from the front lines where his soldiers could see him. He walked among the exhausted paratroopers of the 101st Airborne Division. These men who had held against impossible odds for 7 days, who had endured a week of hell, who had watched their friends die in the snow, who had run out of every supply except raw courage, who had told the German army to go to hell and meant every word. They stared at him as he walked past their positions. The legend himself, the general who had moved heaven and earth to reach them, Old Blood and Guts, come to see the men he had saved. A young private, his face blackened with powder burns, his right hand wrapped in bloody bandages from severe frostbite, his uniform torn and filthy, grabbed Patton's sleeve as he walked past. So the private's military police escort moved quickly to stop him. You don't grab a 3-star general, but Patton waved them back with a gesture. "Sir," the private said, his voice hoarse from screaming orders over artillery fire for 7 days straight. "Sir, we knew you'd come. We told each other every day, even when the Germans demanded surrender. We said Old Blood and Guts won't leave us here to die. He'll come for us. We just have to hold on until he arrives. We never doubted you for a second, sir." George Smith Patton looked at this young soldier. 19 years old, maybe 20. Purple Heart for wounds received in action. Silver Star for conspicuous gallantry. Combat Infantryman Badge. Paratrooper wings. His young face aged a decade by 1 week of continuous combat. "Son," Patton said softly, "you didn't just hold on. You won. So you and these magnificent paratroopers stopped the entire German army cold. You denied them the roads they desperately needed. You disrupted their entire offensive timetable. You fought with a level of courage and determination that I have never seen equaled in 30 years of military service across multiple wars. All I did was bring you some ammunition so you could keep killing Germans more efficiently." The private smiled through cracked and bleeding lips. "Sir, they call you Old Blood and Guts for a reason. Our guts, your blood. We fight, you lead. Together, we're unstoppable. Together, we'll win this war absolutely." George Smith Patton never forgot those words. Years later, in his personal diary, he would write that this moment, standing in the snow among the paratroopers of Bastogne, while hearing a wounded private express absolute confidence in their combined ability to achieve total victory, was the proudest moment of his entire military career, surpassing even his greatest battlefield victories. The relief of Bastogne on December 26, 1944, changed everything about the Battle of the Bulge and possibly the entire course of the war in Europe. The German offensive, Hitler's last desperate gamble to split the Allied armies and force a negotiated peace that would leave Nazi Germany intact, collapsed completely. The bulge that had threatened to cut Allied forces in two became a death trap for German forces caught between converging American armies. George Smith Patton's Third Army didn't stop at Bastogne. They continued driving north and east with relentless aggression, crushing German units against other Allied forces advancing from the opposite directions, systematically destroying Hitler's strategic reserve. The fighting continued through January 1945, vicious, brutal combat in continuing freezing conditions. But the momentum had shifted permanently and irreversibly. The Germans were no longer attacking. They were retreating desperately, trying to escape the trap they had created for themselves, trying to salvage something from the disaster. By January 28, 1945, the Battle of the Bulge was officially over. The German army had suffered absolutely catastrophic losses. 100,000 casualties, dead, wounded, or captured. 800 tanks destroyed or abandoned in the retreat. 1,000 aircraft lost to combat or lack of fuel. Fuel reserves completely exhausted. Ammunition stocks critically depleted. More importantly than the material losses, Germany's strategic reserve was destroyed. The veteran divisions, the experienced soldiers, the equipment that might have defended Germany itself when the Allies finally crossed the Rhine River, all gone. wasted in the snow of the Ardennes in a desperate gamble that had failed completely. And the world knew exactly who had turned the tide of the battle. British Prime Minister Winston Leonard Spencer Churchill, a man not known for praising American generals easily or frequently, stated publicly before the House of Commons. The rapid movement of General Patton's Third Army to relieve Bastogne was one of the most brilliant military operations of this entire war. Only a commander of exceptional ability, aggressive spirit, and tactical genius could have achieved this remarkable feat. The United States Army can be justifiably proud of George Smith Patton. Even Joseph Stalin, dictator of the Soviet Union, and deeply suspicious of Western Allied military capabilities, sent a personal message to President Franklin Delano Roosevelt. The counteroffensive at Bastogne demonstrates convincingly the fighting quality of American troops and the exceptional skill of their commanders. Please convey Soviet congratulations to General Patton for his outstanding achievement. German commanders interviewed extensively after the war, when classified documents were finally declassified and military secrets could be revealed without operational consequences, admitted their professional respect and genuine fear of old blood and guts specifically. General der Panzertruppen Hasso von Manteuffel, who commanded the 5th Panzer Army during the Battle of the Bulge, stated clearly in his memoirs, "We feared Patton more than any other Allied commander. Montgomery was methodical and predictable. Bradley was professionally competent but cautious. Eisenhower was fundamentally an administrator and coordinator. But Patton was genuinely dangerous. He thought like we did, aggressive, fast, willing to accept tactical risks to achieve decisive strategic results. When we learned through our intelligence that he had turned his entire army 90 degrees in 72 hours to attack us, we knew immediately that our offensive had failed. No one else could have done it. Patton was unique in Allied command. Even Field Marshal Erwin Johannes Eugen Rommel, the legendary Desert Fox who had fought Patton directly in North Africa before being forced to commit suicide by Hitler in October 1944, had written in his personal diary after their engagements in Tunisia, "Give me George Patton's Third Army and I could march through the gates of hell itself. That man is a warrior in the oldest and purest sense. He understands instinctively that war is fundamentally about will and aggressive action, not just mathematical calculations and logistics planning." Eisenhower's official report to the combined chiefs of staff said it best. The relief of Bastogne stands as one of the most remarkable military maneuvers in American history. Privately, he told his chief of staff something more revealing. "When I needed a miracle, I called George. Those 4 words, I stake my career." Now that's who Patton is in his essence. Total commitment, absolute confidence, unwavering courage. The paratroopers of the 101st Airborne never forgot. They had endured 7 days of hell, watching friends die in the snow. Without Patton's impossible march, they would have died there. But old blood and guts gave them a third option nobody thought possible: victory. Years later, veterans would tell their grandchildren the same story. And then Patton came, and we knew we had won. Bastogne changed everything. The myth of German invincibility died in the Ardennes snow. From December 26th forward, the Allies advanced relentlessly eastward toward Berlin and final victory. 4 words changed history. I stake my career. Not maybe, not if conditions allow. Patton looked at the impossible and declared with absolute conviction, "I will do this or die trying." That's genuine leadership. That's the aggressive spirit that won World War II. That's why, 8 decades later, we still remember the name George Smith Patton, old blood and guts, the man who saved Bastogne.